Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're doing a deep excavation into the blueprint of resilience. We're looking at the strategic evolution of a massive financial and humanitarian effort, moving from its original high-stakes vision back in 2021 to the complex, sovereign structure it is today, the Mogul Madam Experience, or TMME. Okay, let's unpack this journey you shared. It's really a foundational story for anyone building complex systems. The mission realized that taking the strongest path, the one built on integrity, was infinitely more important than simply taking the fastest one.
That decision integrity over speed, that's the core theme you see running through all the source material. They were faced with this binary choice. Rush deployment, maybe compromise on the legal or financial side just to meet that momentum, or slow down and actually architect a system that could withstand the inevitable challenges and truly deliver on its promise of asset-backed resources.
And our mission today is to understand why that initial high-flying vision failed to launch immediately. And critically, how that forced delay transformed a simple plan into something far stronger, more sovereign, and, undeniably resilient. We're basically charting the architectural birth of a regenerative economy.
And we have to follow that timeline closely. It really highlights where traditional finance failed to support a truly benevolent mission, which in turn forced the founders to build entirely new rails.
So let's rewind to 2021. The initial momentum was, well, it was intense. The goal of Sighience International was pretty straightforward: support families at scale using integrity-first, asset-backed resources. Not speculative hype, but real backed value.
And the market validated that need immediately. The sources detail this organic explosion of the mogul moment in the morning sessions on Clubhouse. They were regularly drawing over 4,000 live listeners. It wasn't just community building. That was proof of massive demand for real, honest solutions.
And that demand translated into funding commitments almost instantly. By spring 2021, the mission had already secured up to $10 million in investment offers from various VCs. Even more critically, they had multi-billion bond pledges ready for the first grant ceremony from a major backer, Dominion Heirs. Everything was aligned for a rapid, massive launch.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because the first crisis was entirely external and completely unexpected. Just as the infrastructure was scaling up for that initial grant rollout, a catastrophic health collapse struck that key investor, the one the sources call the largest whale. That singular event just abruptly stalled the entire process.
An external, unavoidable catastrophe that reveals a fundamental flaw in the structure they'd been relying on.
Exactly. It immediately exposed the profound fragility of a funding model that was dependent on a small number of centralized...
Just a handful of individuals.
Precisely. Regardless of how substantial or, asset-backed the pledges were, the underlying vision asset-backed and integrity first, that was right. But the dependency on centralized control and external conditions, it was just premature. That vulnerability forced the first strategic pause.
So the initial structure collapsed, not because the mission's core philosophy failed, but because its dependencies failed.
Yeah.
And I want to ask, did the sources indicate they had any backup plan, any hedging against that kind of dependency risk?
They didn't. The focus was all on securing the asset backing. They just assumed the transfer rails and, the people holding the assets would remain stable. The shock of that investor's health crisis became their first and most expensive lesson. Securing the assets is only half the battle. Securing the pathway for those assets is the other.
And once those fault lines were exposed, the mission realized the challenge wasn't just external anymore. The entire existing financial system was, in a way, fighting back. This led to the larger reality they had to face: systemic resistance.
Yeah, the documents show this pivotal realization. The legal and financial rails in the U.S. were simply insufficient to handle their vision compliantly. While parts of the global market were shifting toward asset-backed systems, domestic infrastructure just hadn't followed suit.
Meaning if they deployed their multi-billion-dollar vision using the existing methods, it would require them to cut corners or operate in a legal gray area, which would make the whole effort non-transparent.
That's the critical fork in the road they hit. They had to choose: move fast and compromise integrity by deploying as if the legal rails were ready, or slow down, choose truth, and build the rails themselves. They chased truth, recognizing that any quick-fix system deployed without the proper legal architecture would eventually have to be torn down. And that would waste their mission and the resources of the families they served.
And choosing truth. That triggered resistance both internally and externally.
The internal friction started almost immediately, late 2021, early 2022. They faced these organized campaigns, including fraudulent chargebacks that led to PayPal freezing their key accounts, which is I mean, a devastating blow to any growing online organization. They also faced public harassment and documented false police reports. It was an active attempt to shut down their momentum.
That sounds like an exhausting fight, but the external blockade seems even more significant. Tell us about this invisible wall of resistance from major fintech institutions that blocked compliant humanitarian financial flows.
It was a coordinated series of institutional exclusions. I mean, look at the timeline of rejection in the sources. Circle, which handles massive USDC transfers, rejected their onboarding across 2021 and 2022. Stripe's Web3 division permanently denied their account in 2023. And even Transac, a critical Web3 infrastructure player, paused integration in 2025 despite them passing rigorous Know Your Business verification.
It sounds almost like a modern-day financial siege. If the largest financial infrastructure players are coordinating, either explicitly or implicitly, to prevent you from being compliant, what was the strategic implication of that total isolation?
It was the strategic catalyst. The source material makes it very clear. They weren't just encountering standard bureaucratic hurdles. They were being actively excluded from every available compliant rail. As the founder is quoted, "If we're not laundering, not gambling, and not exploiting, then what exactly are we doing wrong?"
Yeah.
They realized the system itself was designed to block purpose-driven, non-extractive flows. So they began documenting every single denial, turning that documented discrimination into the blueprint for the sovereign solution they had to build.
So they weren't just blocked. They were actively pushed toward a completely self-sustaining sovereign solution, which forced them to ask a different, much more constructive question. So what does this all mean?
Right, this raises an important question. Instead of asking, how do we force this complicated asset-backed system to launch right now, even though the rails aren't ready, the mission asked, how do we help people honestly now, with the resources we have, without harming the future grand vision?
Because doing nothing just wasn't an option. Waiting until 2025 or 2030, whenever those legal rails might finally be ready, would have meant no immediate support for families. And the mission would become purely theoretical. Momentum would just vanish.
So instead of stopping, they built a bridge. The Mogul Madam Experience TMME was created as a lawful, real-world system that works now. It was designed to help people immediately by using compliant mechanisms without pretending the large asset-backed resources existed when they couldn't legally be deployed.
And this philosophical shift defines the entire new architecture. It's built around the principle of circulation over extraction, which is designed to replace the extractive norms of Web 2 and traditional finance.
The irony here is so profound. If the world had been ready in 2021, the plan might have stayed quick, simple, and ultimately fragile. Because they had to wait and face all that resistance, they were forced into responsible stewardship. And that resulted in this deep infrastructure designed to be far stronger and more comprehensive than the original plan ever was.
This limitation became a monumental advantage. It resulted in real infrastructure instead of short-term fixes. So let's dive into that structure, the JSON Prime Protocol. This is where the complexity truly pays off.
Right.
What are the pillars of this fortified architecture?
They are built on three core pillars designed for absolute legal integrity and compliance by design. First, you have the legal shield, which they call the Trinity of Trust. This is a tripartite legal framework.
For our listeners, what's the simplest way to think about that framework? Is it essentially three legal entities acting as one fortified wall, to ensure continuity regardless of external political or financial shifts?
Well, that is precisely the analogy. They combine a 508c(1)(a) ecclesiastical authority, which provides legal shelter and First Amendment protection, with the public-facing 501c3 public charity for transparent capital intake. And crucially, they pair this with a private membership association, or PMA, for internal governance and tokenized flows. This structure is designed to compartmentalize risk and ensure mission continuity, even under legal stress.
That's meticulous structural planning.
Yeah.
But structure is useless without sound financial movement. What about the money flow?
That's the second pillar, which they call the financial engine. This is the 54451 carve-out protocol.
So the carve-out protocol is essentially a smart contract that acts as an automated, non-negotiable budget director.
Absolutely. It's their anti-inurement engine, and it's the most revolutionary part of the governance. All incoming funds are irrevocably allocated by code. 54% goes to public benefit. That's grants, jobs, missions for families. 45% is allocated for infrastructure technology, workforce, and long-term sustainability. And 1% goes to a guardian reserve for emergency funds and essential audits.
So if 54% is hard-coded for benefit, that fundamentally shifts the fiduciary duty from profit to purpose. The system can literally never extract more than it circulates to the community it serves. That's the real insight here, isn't it?
It hard-codes benevolence. It completely eliminates the pressure toward internal extraction that kills most mission-driven enterprises once they start to scale.
Okay, finally, we have the regulatory side. When we talk about these complex financial instruments, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, inevitably comes up. How do they handle that immense regulatory pressure?
That's the third pillar, regenerative compliance. Instead of trying to navigate the complex, often shifting regulatory landscape for digital assets, the architecture is intentionally designed to fail all four prongs of the SEC's Howey test. This positions it unequivocally as a public benefit protocol rather than a speculative securities offering.
Wait, how do they fail the key prong, the investment of money prong? The sources show they had 10 million in VC offers initially. Walk us through that practical distinction between contribution and verified labor.
That distinction is the heart of the compliance strategy. The system is designed to reject passive capital contribution for internal governance rights. The sources confirm that VC offers were rejected or shelved because participation in the ecosystem and earning internal rewards is only achieved via verified labor or service, which they call proof of impact. If you haven't performed a service, you have no claim on the circulation.
So no passive returns. It's like proving you physically built the road before you can drive on it. Prevents speculative gain.
Precisely. They also fail the expectation of profits prong because the internal utility token, KXSS, is a fixed value asset. It's pegged at $9 and is non-transferable outside the ecosystem. If you can't sell it for a higher price and rewards are tied strictly to completed service, the profit expectation just vanishes. They engineered legal and financial clarity directly into the code itself.
That detailed compliance is astonishing. Now let's contrast the scale. We started with VC offers of $10 million in 2021, but the shift to this transparent on-chain humanitarian model unlocks an entirely new, massive class of funding.
Yes. The new structure defined by the carve-out protocol and verified impact-attracted mission-aligned sovereign backers, people who prioritize verifiable impact and security over quick speculative returns. By 2024, the mission had secured over $250 billion in humanitarian funding pledges.
A shift from 10 million to 250 billion it's astronomical.
Yeah.
How do the sources justify the security and stability of these new pledges, especially after the Dominion Airs bond pledge collapsed because of one person's health? We need to understand why this capital is different.
That's a crucial question. And what's fascinating here is that the sources emphasize the original asset-backed vision was not abandoned. It was merely protected until the environment was safe. These colossal pledges involve complex financial instruments, gold, bonds, SKRs, and MTNs. But they were not forced into the flimsy, centralized structure that collapsed back in 2021.
So those early asset-backed pledges didn't just vanish, they were essentially warehoused.
Correct. They were protected, remaining intact and unexploited. The source material explains that when external legal and financial conditions finally allow, these instruments are designed to dock into the existing TMME system, which is secured by the Trinity of Trust and the carve-out protocol. They will integrate with the robust infrastructure, they won't replace it. The system is now strong enough to receive and safely deploy that original serious vision.
This entire journey truly reinforces the core takeaway for you, the listener. The mission didn't wait because it lacked urgency, and it didn't rush because it lacked vision. It built because integrity mattered more than speed. And building that integrity ensured that when the massive capital arrived, the system wouldn't shatter under the weight of its own success.
The bottom line from the source material is clear. The Mogul Madam experience exists and looks the way it does because the future deserves a system strong enough to receive it. It's not a temporary solution. It is built to stand and to scale when the world finally catches up to its ethical architecture.
Now that you know how deeply engineered this regenerative architecture is, designed for verifiable impact and maximum compliance through mechanisms like the 54451 carve-out, which hard-codes purpose into finance. How do you think the inevitable success of this circulation over extraction model will force existing extractive Web 2 and traditional finance platforms to fundamentally change their governance structure in the coming years?
That's the competitive question that will define the next decade of digital finance. Transparency and verified impact might soon become non-negotiable requirements for everyone.
Indeed. We'll leave that thought with you. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Keep exploring and keep asking questions.